His new book, Comedy Samurai, 40 Years of Blood, Guts, and Laughter, a memoir of Larry Charles. Larry Charles is here in studio. Good to see you, Larry. How are you?
Pleasure. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Are you kidding? Thank you for all the laughs you've given all of us.
My pleasure.
Over the years. Seinfeld, Curb, Borat, Entourage in terms of directing and also writing. And this, it's all. Why did you want to put it all in a book? Just felt
I was sitting around. I had nothing else to do. I was out of work, and I have a really good memory, as it turns out.
Okay.
And I just remembered all this stuff. The original book was 1,000 pages long,
right?
And they said you can't put out a 1,000-page book, so I cut it in half and started with Fridays actually.
Right.
And I had the pandemic, and I just had time, and I started writing, and here it is.
Fridays is like that the comedy sketch show.
Correct.
That was attempted to join the SNL sort of.
We were hoping it wouldn't. We were hoping it would forge its own identity, but the network obviously wanted it to be as much of a ripoff as possible, and that was the tension of the show. But I got to meet Larry David there, and he took me under his wing, and Michael Richards. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Larry took you under his wing there?
We were from the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, and he was a little bit older than me, and he was like an adult, and I was still like a kid.
Yes.
And he kind of taught me how to be a man on some level, and also how to write, and how to have discipline, and how to have integrity. Things I really didn't know that much about beforehand. I was a bellhop. That was my last job before getting a job on the show.
And so, did you go from Fridays to Seinfeld, or
there was
no?
about a 10-year break where I was kind of out of work for a lot of the time.
Right.
I worked on Arsenio for a while. I wrote jokes for him. That was a very tough gig for me and for him. A lot of people don't realize being a black man on TV at that time, particularly, being a black star was dangerous. He got so much hate mail. This is all pre-internet.
Right.
But he used to get stacks and stacks of hate mail.
No kidding.
Oh, my God. It was unreal. We used to have metal screeners in the audience to check people as they came in and take the weapons off of them. It was a very volatile atmosphere, and he had to play it cool on camera.
Well, it worked.
It worked. It really did. And he kind of pioneered a lot of things that he doesn't really get credit for that we now take for granted.
So did you meet Seinfeld then for the first time on Seinfeld?
I met Seinfeld for the first time on Fridays. He was a semi-regular on a show called Benson, if you remember that show. He played a comedy writer who wrote jokes for the governor. And he was down in the sub-basement where the writers for Fridays were. And he would sit forlornly in this room in the sub-basement, knowing that he wasn't being used and the gig was going to kind of be ending, he felt. And I would sometimes wander down that hallway and see him, and we kind of talked for a while. And eventually he was fired from that job. So that was the first time I met him.
And then, obviously, you joined the staff of Seinfeld, and the rest is, if you will, now in a memoir that called, Comedy Samurai. And then I'll show the photograph that's on the back.
Right.
It is you in the episode that you wrote as well, right? The airport.
Yes.
And you're the one who stunk up the bathroom on the plane in Coach. That's you right there.
I wrote that part, and everybody said, well, you have to play it. So it seemed like it was like natural casting, and I didn't have to audition for it or anything, thank God.
Yes.
And so that's like one of my. I'm very proud of that moment. Actually,
so clearly you put the screen grab on the back of
I
the
love
book.
that picture. Yeah.
So okay? Let's get into some of the shows that you wrote on Seinfeld. The airport, where that episode that you're referring to right there, where Jerry's in first class having the time of his life, and Elaine's miserable in Coach. Is that born out of your personal experience?
Well, what's interesting about that episode too was that the original Elaine story, and this has happened to me a number of times on the show, the original Elaine story, and this was a true story, was that somebody died next to her on the plane. I don't know if you've ever had that experience.
I have not, sir.
People sometimes die on planes, and what do? You're in the middle of the air, and they just cover the person up with a sheet, and there's no other seats. All the seats are taken, and you have to sit next to a corpse through the rest of the flight.
So
that was the original story, and they thought it was too dark, so I just changed it to a kind of a guy who was a pain in the neck.
And then where did the stinking up the bathroom come from?
Stinking up the bathroom, haven't we all had that experience on one side of it or the other? You know, we've all been guilty of it on one level. You know, so
another episode that you are credited for writing, Bubble Boy. You wrote the Bubble Boy episode
with Larry. We wrote that one together.
Where did
actually
that come up? Where did that? What?
You know, on Seinfeld, one of the hardest things was coming up with stories. We were always groping and flailing and just like grabbing at the air for stories. And I was trying to. I guess we had read a story about the Bubble Boy, a kid who lived in the bubble. That was one element of it. And then one of the writers, a guy named Bill Masters, had told us a story about playing Trivial Pursuits, and that the card had a misprint and said Moops instead of Moors.
So that's real?
Oh, yeah, that really happens. Everything on Seinfeld pretty much actually in some form or another actually happened. So he had that story about the Moops, and I don't think he realized himself how rich that story was. And so we thought, oh, that's a funny thing. George plays with the Bubble Boy, and the Bubble Boy insists that Moops, you know, that argument seemed rich to us.
And so you're saying, so the Moops thing was just sitting on a pile, and you're like, let's bring it off the pile.
Exactly.
For a Trivial Pursuit game against somebody living in a plastic bubble.
Correct. That's correct. And sometimes those stories they were woven together in a way that just seemed very organic and funny and natural, and it worked out really well. Okay. And that had the Yoo-Hoo, his dad, the Bubble Boy's dad was the guy that sold the Yoo-Hoo. And that was kind of a nice, fun aspect. And we got like a case of Yoo-Hoo for that. So, we didn't realize we could take advantage of things like that.
Here's another one. Great one. The Chinese restaurant episode.
That's Larry David's.
That's Larry's?
That was one of the original episodes he wrote. And it really had no story. It was like a Beckett play. It was all about waiting for a table, which we've all been through.
Yes.
And the network was kind of freaked out. There was no story. They didn't know what to do. It was funny. It was great. But they're used to a traditional sitcom 3-act structure.
Right.
And this is one of the things we deconstructed on the show. And eventually, with just adding the idea that they had to go to a movie, that's what made it acceptable and palatable to the network, and we were able to do that show.
And every single time, you know, Seinfeld in the comedy stands the test of time. In the writing, in the comedy, in the acting, but there are constructs to the plot that just wouldn't exist in this day and age. Like, for instance, a payphone being right in the middle of this storyline in the Chinese restaurant where George needs to get to a payphone.
Well, technology.
Now you just take a cell phone out, right, and that takes it away. Another episode that you're associated with, the limo, right? Where
I wrote the limo.
You wrote the limo, where they're coming off of the plane and their ride isn't available.
Somebody had told us that they had a friend who came off of the plane and saw a driver holding the sign.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, what if and he said that he was that person. And I thought, what if that person, the real person, was like a Nazi? What would happen then? And then George that just seemed, again, like just flowed from there.
That thought just pops in your head. That thought
popped into my head, yes. Yeah. And everybody thought that was funny, and then I was able to write that episode,
Where the limousine is actually supposed to, O'Brien is supposed to be the Nazi who's now speaking at Madison Square Garden.
Right, and George is mistaken for O'Brien, and Jerry and George are stuck now in the limo with two neo-Nazis who are holding guns on them, and it was fun. It was a very kind of, again, untraditional episode.
Fantastic. And another one I want to bring up here to you, Larry Charles here on the Rich Eisen Show, is the ex-girlfriend episode.
Yes.
It's the season 2 debut.
That was a Larry episode also.
That was a Larry episode.
Yes, Larry David.
Okay, and because the reason why I bring it up here is you're on this as an executive story editor, I guess.
Yes, at that time.
But that episode, when Jerry was here, asked him about what his favorite line was in the history of Seinfeld. And he mentioned the line that he tells the ex-girlfriend who has a problem with what he does for a living.
Yes.
He says, but you're a cashier.
That's right. That was a great line.
He said that the response that came from the audience on that was the moment he realized that the show was going to make it. That's what he said.
I mean, yes, that's an explosive line. It was a great line.
You would agree with that assessment?
I wouldn't say that it wouldn't be my personal choice.
What would be your personal choice then?
I might go for something from the Bookman scene from the library. where Jerry's kind of trying to like fend off this aggressive library cop, you know, and they're going back and forth. And I just that entire scene to me was like, again, outside the realm of normal sitcoms. We were so influenced by things that weren't normal sitcom influences, like Dragnet and stuff like that. And that was taken from Dragnet, and that's one of my favorite moments from the show. Is that just that scene alone?
The actor Philip Baker Hall.
Philip Baker Hall really embodied it. Yes,
he delivered the soliloquy of how society was breaking down because of the way that he thought Jerry was handling a library book.
Yes, the peepees and the wee-wees and the five Chinese brothers, and you know, and that he called him a joy boy, and you know, he's a flashy guy. He just was like he was great. Philip Baker Hall really just took that over.
Was that all scripted?
That was all scripted, yes.
Did you write that?
I wrote that. And also the rhythm of it, though, was so perfectly Dragnet-y.
With his trench coat?
Yeah, he was like serious. I don't even know if he even got how funny it was. You know, he was like great. And Jerry couldn't keep a straight face. Actually, we're constantly cutting away from Jerry because Jerry was laughing through so much of Philip Baker Hall's monologue.
Yeah, because we were remarking to that again to Jerry. He said that he when he was telling the story about coming up with I don't know if you were still on the show or not, the Sea Was Angry, My Friends moment.
Yes, the marine biologist.
Were you on that?
Yes, yes.
So how they came up overnight with the soliloquy for George to say in the diner.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Because they didn't marry the two about the Kramer hitting golf balls and the marine and
it was the perfect ending. It was such a beautiful ending.
And that he said that's a legitimate reaction to Jason Alexander, the look on his face, legitimate reaction to Jason Alexander nailing word perfect what was just written and handed to him. And I'm like, really, that's just you being you. And he says, we don't act. Larry and I do not act, is what he said, pretty much. It's true.
Well, Jerry was a great audience. He loved watching Michael work and Julia work and Jason work. And he laughs. I mean, he's great comedians like the Jack Bennys of the world were also very willing to share the laughs with the people around them. They knew they would come off well if everybody was funny. And Jerry understood that dynamic. And so he didn't have to be the funniest person in the scene as long as the scene was funny.
Larry Charles here on the Rich Eisen Show. Directed several episodes of Curb as well.
Yes.
The number of times that people come on here, and obviously Larry's been here, but the number of times that folks will say that you just get the beats and everybody kind of just takes it from there, right? How does one direct episodes like that?
Well, the outlines, I mean, the thing is, as you know from talking to Larry's a very structured person. He's a very ordered person, a very controlling person, and he's a writer, first and foremost. So those outlines for Curb are very elaborate and intricate and explicit. And so I know exactly where we need to go. Everybody knows exactly where they need to go. There's just no dialogue. And you hire great actors who can really riff with Larry, and you get to these story places like J.B. Smoove, because Larry would audition every single actor that came in. For years and years, every single actor that came in, Larry would actually do the audition with them to see how it felt. And so we hired a lot of great actors because of that, and they could follow that outline and kind of all they needed to do was say what would be said in those situations, and it would be funny. The situation was so funny, and so all I had to do was make sure that it was covered and to push the comedy as often as possible, to get people to go further across that line and see what would happen. And that was kind of the excitement. When everything would kind of fall apart is when it would really get great.
I love it. So were you there for J.B. Smoove's audition?
Yes. Yes, I was.
What was that like?
It was amazing. He came in, and that was originally meant to be a much smaller part, but he came in, and he was so funny, and Larry and he were such a natural together that we wound up just writing for him and expanding that part, because it would be crazy, it would be self-defeating not to take advantage of JB's improv skills.
Well, I know you directed the Meet the Blacks episode in 2007, where I imagine that was his first episode?
I think that was his premiere episode.
And just, again, he's an all-time great, and his
really
soliloquy about to tell Larry how to handle, a Nazi when he comes across
That's
one.
Right.
Were you behind the camera?
I didn't direct that one, but I was a producer on that. Yeah,
get in that. You know what, Larry? You just got to open it. You got to go in there. You got to wipe your feet.
Yeah.
You got to do.
Oh my God!
There,
it was amazing.
And so when you see that, though, are you hoping don't break, just keep going? When you're behind
Larry,
the lens, there?
like Jerry, is somebody who loved to laugh and was cracking up and breaking up often. We had Philip Baker Hall on the show also.
Yes,
they did a thing where Philip Baker Hall was the doctor, and they were talking about, he had a little, who's the little prick here? They were. It was like a kind of a back and forth between the two of them. Maybe that's not the right word to say. Yeah, but it's a great scene, and Larry was laughing so much, like he did with JB, that it was again where you have to just cut away. You have to make sure you have other coverage to go to, so that you can keep it going and keep that energy going, but not have to rely on seeing Larry laughing while it's all going on.
Well, the episode, the Bat Mitzvah. Season 6, episode 10. You directed that, correct? You directed
Season 6, episode 10. Well, I can't remember.
The Bat Mitzvah, which is the one that was shot here in Southern California. And I remember because it was the one that, having met Jeff Schaffer, he put me in it. Where I shook hands with Jeff Garland. And I'll hear every now and then somebody will text me, did I just see you on Curb? I'm like, yeah, I hope you didn't blink. Because all I just was shake his hand and that was the end of it.
Right.
But I sat there with you and everybody else in the video village or back as Larry delivered the soliloquy at the end of the episode that is filled with unmentionables.
Right. I'm surprised you brought it up because you can't really
say what he was saying.
Yeah.
But all I remember is he couldn't get through it.
He could not get through it. Right.
I don't know how many takes it was. But each one was more enjoyable for me to watch because he could not keep it together.
You knew it was great if he couldn't get through it. And then the challenge was to get him through it because you knew if he was laughing that hard, it was a classic piece. So the issue was him getting through it, and there was always a way to do that because you didn't want to lose that energy. That comic energy was really one of a kind.
Yeah. Comedy Samurai, 40 years of blood, guts, and laughter with Larry Charles. Thanks for coming on, sir.
My pleasure. It was great to be here.
Appreciate it, and thank you again for all those laughs throughout the years.
I'll try to give you a few more before I shuffle off this mortal coil.
Well, hopefully not too soon. Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.